Pokemon Black and White speedruns have gone through some crazy changes with the many discoveries speedrunners have found over the past few years. But when it comes to speedrunning any game, there's always more to find when you look hard enough. And that's exactly what speedrunners did through the use of dust clouds, but likely not in the ways you might expect. So in today's video, we're going to be exploring how this discovery changed the entire Pokemon Black and White speedrunning route, as well as the science behind this entire skip. When it comes to Pokemon speedruns, changes are not made easily without glitches or trying to use an entirely new Pokemon. And somehow, this discovery managed to save time without the use of either. Because this strategy doesn't involve using Dust Cloud Pokemon such as Drillbur. Instead, it's used to skip multiple trainer fights in a row. Which ones exactly? Well, I want you to think of the most boring sections for Pokemon games. What comes to mind? For someone like me who starts and finishes Pokemon games more than most, I'd have to give it to the sections where you battle against the evil villains. Almost every Pokemon game to date has been filled with at least one of these sections, where you do nothing but fight hundreds of grunts with extremely underwhelming Pokemon filling up their party. Now imagine how much time you would save by being able to skip even one of these battles. But speedrunners didn't just want to skip one of these battles. What they wanted was Plasma Skip. Through the power of spawning dust clouds, we can skip a total of 4 Team Plasma fights. And while this doesn't skip all of them, it still saves a ridiculous amount of time compared to actually fighting them. Now, you might be wondering after seeing this trick, why not just skip all the grunts if we can already skip this many of them? Well, there's a pretty big reason why. We're gonna need to dive into some Pokemon science first to fully understand this skip and shed some light on the matter. So the way Plasma Skip works is when a dust cloud spawns in front of a trainer's vision, the trainer won't be able to walk toward or challenge you to a battle, unless you talk to the trainer or walk to the other side of the dust cloud. But the big problem with this skip comes from having to spawn dust clouds multiple times in a row. In fact, this entire process is so complicated that it needs a dedicated RNG manipulation to pull it off. And the thing about Generation 5 Pokemon RNG manipulations is that each Nintendo DS handheld system requires a different manipulation from every individual that wants to attempt manipulation. This is due to Generation 5 Pokemon RNG taking values from what's called a DS MAC address, and each DS MAC address is unique to the system running the game, which means that someone out there on planet Earth randomly playing Cory in the House for the Nintendo DS might just have the fastest Nintendo DS ever invented for Pokemon speedrunning. But while this might be a cool, unique factor to Gen 5 Pokemon games, it also makes it really hard to start speedrunning the games, since anyone wanting to perform manipulations or these skips will have to make their own manipulation. This manipulation making process is done by first using a program called RNG Reporter. RNG Reporter is a tool that breaks down a ridiculous amount of information from Pokemon games and makes it very digestible. It's so digestible that people will often use it to find perfect IV shiny Pokemon with a really good nature through RNG manipulation. But more importantly, this tool will get you exactly where you need to be to eventually start doing Plasma Skip. All you need to do is go into the Gen 5 section of RNG Reporter, give it your DS MAC address, catch a high-level Pokemon whose IVs are easy to figure out, tell it the exact date, time, and buttons that you may have held during the intro screen while you were catching the Pokemon, and it'll know exactly how to treat your specific DS for RNG. Now, I wish I could say this were the part where you could start doing Plasma Skip if you were a speedrunner, but unfortunately, you still have to go through the painstaking process of finding a nearly perfect Adamant Lillipup on Route 2, since it's currently the fastest Pokemon for speedruns. This is because the date that you do your Lillipup manipulation on will also be used for Plasma Skip. But once you finally found your way through RNG Reporter, gave it your Nintendo DS's date of birth, credit card information, and social security, then research how to find your perfect pup, you can finally figure out how to do Plasma Skip on your Nintendo DS. The process for doing a successful plasma skip starts by saving on a specific tile inside of Chargestone Cave right before the plasma gauntlet. This specific tile is important to save and reset on because of what I will be referring to as the 20-step rule with dust clouds. You see, the way the 20-step rule works is that every 20 steps, there's a chance for a dust cloud to spawn. And it just so happens that when you run from the exact tile I mentioned, it'll line up to be exactly 19 steps for reaching the perfect spot for a dust cloud to appear. No other position on the map will work like this one does because the spot where you take your 20th step on will determine the exact position on the map where a dust cloud will show up. But there's also a small catch to this 20th step we take. If you look back on the footage of plasma skip being performed, you may have noticed speedrunners will sometimes move back and forth on the 19th step before taking the 20th. This is because they are controlling what is called PID RNG. The reason PID RNG is important is because this specific type of RNG determines exactly when a dust cloud will spawn. Luckily for speedrunners, many of the actions you take as a player will move the PID RNG forward, like walking, running, or biking. However, all these actions I listed don't help to line up the PID RNG properly, since taking extra steps to move the PID RNG isn't a great solution thanks to the 20-step rule. So, in order to abide by this rule, moving back and forth on a tile where you can get an encounter on becomes the best option to advance PID RNG forward, since moving back and forth doesn't count as a step, and will easily let us spawn in the first of 4 dust clouds. But now that we've spawned the dust cloud, we have a slight problem. You can't spawn more than 1 dust cloud at a time. And the only way to get rid of the previous dust cloud is if you enter a battle or a loading zone, which makes battling 3 out of 17 plasma members the most appealing option to despawn the dust cloud. And once speedrunners have exited the plasma fight, all they need to do is repeat the steps they took to spawn the dust clouds by taking 19 steps after the battle, moving back and forth to advance the PID RNG, taking the 20th step once they've advanced it enough, rinse and repeat, and you got yourself a spicy 4-trainer plasma skip. Now, I know I mentioned that entering a battle would cause the old dust cloud to go away, which means theoretically you could get a 7-trainer plasma skip by forcing an encounter through not using a repel. But the 20-step rule makes this nearly impossible, because those 20 steps need to be done with 0 encounters in between them, since entering a battle forces you to take those 20 steps all over again. And finding a plasma skip that would be able to do this is likely not gonna happen, which makes using repels and battling those extra plasma grunts the best way to perform this skip as of this video. And either way, the extra experience you lose from battling 3 less trainers diminishes the time you gain back quite substantially, since less levels means potentially harder fights in the future. In total, this skip saves about 1 minute and 30 seconds over the course of the entire run, which is quite a gold mine for speedrunners. But as of this video, only 4 out of 48 runners who've ever done this speedrun have been crazy enough to develop a manipulation around plasma skip. And while it has substantially improved the Japanese and English 80% world records, it's easy to see why very few people are doing plasma skip when you take everything into account. From having to spend hours researching your Nintendo DS in a complicated program, to figuring out how to get a perfect Lillipup to spawn, before finally making it to where you can develop your own plasma skip, is an extremely tall order for any human being hoping to compete on the leaderboards. But it's those people that do fully commit to doing this skip that deserve a ton of praise for sticking to it, as well as the folks who develop these tools that let us do crazy things like this in the first place. I want to give a massive shout out to Skoa Gogo for helping with research on this topic. He's not only a good friend of mine, but also a fantastic speedrunner who you should check out. I'll leave a link in the description. As always, be sure to subscribe to me if you enjoyed this breakdown and want more Pokemon speedrunning news and content.